Bulky. Most people think big muscles are bad for boxing. Fighters like this are expected to stiffen up, slow down, and fade as the fight goes on. Evander Holyfield stood out immediately at heavyweight for basically looking like a bodybuilder for that era. He was yoked out of his mind well into his 40s and carried far more muscle than most of the division. Against Riddick Bowe, Bowe would block the first punch, but Holyfield's big arms would still knock him off balance. Against Ray Mercer in 1995, it looked the same. Holyfield wasn't throwing full power shots every time. Some punches were short, some were mostly arm punches, and they still made Mercer stop and reset. That's one of the hidden benefits of bulky muscle. Arm punches carry more weight. You don't need perfect rotation for the shot to matter. David Haye also had a bulky build. Against Jean-Marc Mormec in 2007, Haye didn't always load up. He'd throw short hooks and quick right hands, and Mormec still had to respect them. And then there's the part nobody talks about. Bulky fighters look stronger and more intimidating. Guards come up sooner. Fighters hesitate in ways they wouldn't against someone smaller. Lanky. Lanky fighters are all arms and legs. Long limbs, narrow torso, light frame. They look stretched out compared to most opponents. The first thing you notice is how far their hands and feet reach, even when they're standing still. Most people think their advantage is just reach. That's only part of it. The real edge is timing. A normal fighter has to step forward to land a punch. Feet move, weight shifts, balance changes. That's the moment counters can happen. Lanky fighters don't need that step. They can hit while standing still, catching opponents as they walk into range. You think you're finally in position, and then you get hit anyway. Take Thomas Hearns against Roberto Duran in 1984. Duran wasn't losing exchanges. He was getting hit before exchanges could even start. Every step forward cost him something. The right hand met him while his weight was still moving. Watching it back, it looks unfair. Duran kept trying to arrive, and Hearns kept hitting him first. Paul Williams did the same thing against Antonio Margarito in 2007. Williams backed up throwing jabs while Margarito marched forward. Margarito absorbed punches just to enter range. By the time he was close enough to trade, he'd already been hit all night. Stocky. Stocky fighters don't need space to hurt you. Shorter frame and compact arms. Everything is tight. When distance collapses, that build starts working in their favor immediately. Long-limbed fighters need room. They need extension. Stocky fighters don't. Their punches travel on shorter arcs and reach full power faster because the mass is closer to the center of the body. That's why they're most dangerous up close. Mike Tyson was the clearest example. When he slipped under a jab, he didn't reset before punching. He was already in position. Hooks and uppercuts came from inches away, landing before taller opponents could straighten their arms. Against Trevor Berbick in 1986, Tyson stayed chest to chest. Berbick's longer punches were smothered before extension, while Tyson's shots fired instantly from tight angles. Berbick barely had room to throw back. Joe Frazier fought the same way. Against Muhammad Ali in 1971, Frazier dipped low, stepped inside, and kept exchanges compact. His left hook didn't come from distance. It came from underneath Ali's line of sight. The punch that dropped Ali in the 15th round was thrown from inside range, where reach stopped mattering. That compact build also affects balance. With a lower center of gravity, stocky fighters stay grounded when punches land. They don't get pushed back easily, and they recover their stance faster after contact. Inside exchanges stay crowded, chaotic, and uncomfortable. Short. Shorter fighters experience range differently the moment the bell rings. Their head sits lower, their center of gravity stays closer to the hips, and most straight punches naturally pass overhead unless the opponent adjusts downward. To land clean, taller fighters have to dip forward or widen their stance, which puts them in an awkward position. Sean Porter fought his entire career inside that space. At around 5 feet 7 inches, he was almost always the shorter man. Against Danny Garcia in 2018, Porter slipped underneath the jab repeatedly, stepping forward as punches passed over his head. As Garcia reached down to connect, Porter closed the gap and fired hooks from below Garcia's eye line. Those punches didn't need full extension. They rose directly into the chest and chin while Garcia was still leaning forward. Isaac Cruz shows the same pattern at lightweight. At roughly 5 feet 4, he gives up height in nearly every fight. Against Gervonta Davis in 2021, Cruz advanced behind a high guard with his head positioned low. Davis's straight shots skimmed gloves or missed high, while Cruz's hooks traveled upward through the middle. Every exchange started with Cruz underneath the punch, and finished inside the pocket. David Tua fought that way at heavyweight. At about 5 feet 10, he was giving up nearly half a foot against most elite heavyweights. Against Lennox Lewis in 2000, Tua couldn't win at range. He slipped under jabs and launched left hooks upward while Lewis was still extending downward. Most of Tua's clean moments came from that position. Low entry, upward punch, immediate pressure. The same pattern seen in shorter fighters across every division. Skinny fat. This is the body type that looks the least impressive at the weigh-in. No sharp muscle lines, narrow shoulders, soft midsection. Standing next to more defined fighters, it can look like the conditioning isn't there. They're built for performance, not aesthetics. Paulie Malignaggi fought that way his entire career. He never sat down on punches and rarely tightened his stance. His shoulders stayed loose and his hands kept moving without visible strain. Against Lovemore in Do in 2008, Malignaggi circled and threw jabs continuously without planting his feet. Even late in the fight, his output looked the same as it did early. He didn't pause after exchanges or need long resets between combinations. You could see the same thing with Paul Spadafora. Against Joel Casamayor in 2001, Spadafora absorbed clean shots but immediately returned fire without stepping away. The exchanges never forced him to stop and recover. In the later rounds, Casamayor began waiting longer between attacks. Spadafora kept throwing single shots and combinations at the same rhythm, even while backing up. Another example was Joe Calzaghe. His physique never looked powerful, but his output barely dipped across 12 rounds. Against Jeff Lacey, Calzaghe threw nearly 1,000 punches without visibly tightening or slowing, overwhelming a stronger-looking opponent through sustained activity rather than power. Thick. This is the body type people misread the most. Not lean, not bulky, not soft either. Thick through the torso, dense through the legs and hips, with weight that looks awkward rather than athletic. It's the kind of build that gets labeled slow before the fight even starts. But once punches land, it feels different. Thick fighters don't absorb shots the same way others do. The contact doesn't snap them back or fold their posture. It lands and settles, like hitting something solid instead of something springy. Sonny Liston had a thick build. Against Floyd Patterson in 1962, Patterson landed jabs early while stepping inside. The punches connected, but Liston's stance barely changed. He stayed planted, shoulders squared, feet underneath him. When Liston punched back, Patterson moved, not because of speed, but because the force traveled straight through him. The same thing showed up against Cleveland Williams in 1966. Williams attacked with quick combinations, darting in and out. The shots landed, but Liston didn't shift. When he returned fire, Williams was knocked backward before he could reset. George Foreman had that same thickness. Against Joe Frazier in 1973, Foreman absorbed hooks inside without collapsing his stance. Frazier's punches bent arms and shoulders, but they didn't move Foreman's base. When Foreman threw back, the exchange changed immediately. Short punches sent Frazier stumbling because Foreman stayed planted while his opponent was still moving. Balanced. A balanced body type rarely stands out. No obvious physical edge. On the scale and at the weigh-in, nothing jumps off the screen. That's usually seen as a disadvantage. Without a standout trait, these fighters are expected to lose to specialists. The taller boxer at range, the stronger one inside, the faster one in exchanges. But balance changes how a fighter moves between moments. Because the weight stays centered, punches flow into steps, defense flows into counters, and recovery happens immediately after contact. You could see it clearly with Sugar Ray Leonard. At around 5 feet 10 and 147 pounds, he wasn't oversized for welterweight and wasn't small either. Against Thomas Hearns in 1981, Leonard began the fight boxing at range. As the rounds passed, he shifted forward, taking exchanges inside without changing his stance or posture. Nothing looked forced. He never had to reset his feet to change roles. Mayweather was built the same way early on. At roughly 5 feet 8, fighting between 130 and 135 pounds, he never relied on size advantages. Against Diego Corrales in 2001, he moved between lead hand control, shoulder roll defense, and short offensive bursts without widening his base. His feet stayed underneath him no matter where the exchange happened. Bernard Hopkins had that same kind of build, especially later in his career. At about 6 feet 1 and 160 pounds, he wasn't particularly big for middleweight. Against Felix Trinidad in 2001, Hopkins controlled exchanges with small pivots and short steps, staying set after contact and ready to act again immediately. Skinny. Skinny fighters are fast. Not explosive power fast, movement fast. Less mass to shift and feet that can change direction without delay. Because the body carries less weight, small steps happen instantly. A half step back or a short slide to the side is enough to take punches offline. Shakur Stevenson is built like that. Narrow frame, thin upper body, very little mass pulling him into the canvas. Against Oscar Valdez in 2022, Valdez stepped in behind combinations and kept falling short. Shakur wasn't jumping out of range. He was sliding a few inches backward or drifting laterally as the punches came. Those movements didn't require resets. His stance stayed intact, allowing him to counter immediately. Dimitri Bivol has the same build at light heavyweight. At around 6 feet, he doesn't carry much upper body mass for 175 pounds and stays light on his feet. Against Canelo Alvarez in 2022, Bivol repeatedly stepped just outside the line of attack. Hooks skimmed past. Straight shots brushed shoulders. Canelo had to reset because Bivol was already gone. The speed wasn't about reaction time. It came from how little effort it took to move. Heavy. Some fighters look like they're carrying too much weight. Thicker torso, softer midsection. On the scale, it looks like a problem. Most people assume it means slow feet, bad conditioning, and poor durability. But once the fight starts, that extra mass actually helps. When heavy boxers get hit, punches don't move them the way you expect. Shots land clean, but instead of snapping them backward, they get absorbed. You hit them and they're still in the pocket. Joe Joyce is a good example. Against Daniel Dubois, Dubois landed sharp right hands early. Clean shots that usually force separation. Joyce took them and kept walking forward. Dubois would land, take a step back, and Joyce was already in front of him again. The exchange never really ended. The same thing happened against Joseph Parker in 2022. Parker landed combinations and tried to reset his feet. Joyce stayed close, absorbing shots and continuing forward, forcing Parker to defend immediately after landing. What looks like slowness becomes pressure. Because the weight doesn't shift easily, clean punches don't create space. Fighters can't rely on contact to reset the action. Tall. Tall fighters start with two built-in advantages: reach and head position. Their arms extend farther, and their head sits higher than most punches are designed to land. Straight shots that would be clean at level height often fall short or strike arms and shoulders instead. To reach the head, shorter fighters have to punch upward. That lifts their weight, opens their stance, and exposes the body underneath. Lennox Lewis was 6'5", and he used those advantages constantly. Against Ray Mercer in 1996, Mercer had to step deep and reach upward to land anything clean. Lewis's jab met him early, disrupting his balance before exchanges could form. When Mercer leaned forward to close range, Lewis's right hand landed while Mercer was still stepping in. Nikolai Valuev stood so tall that opponents couldn't reach his head with straight punches. At 7 feet, jabs and straight rights simply fell short. Opponents were forced to abandon straight punches and rely on overhands. Those shots required full commitment, froze the feet, and made entries predictable. Against David Haye in 2009, Haye had to leap forward to make contact. Each jump left him stationary on landing. Valuev could crowd him immediately afterward, leaning his weight and forcing resets even when the punches weren't clean.